So President Trump has caved to the Chinese. They apparently called his bluff on issuing new tariffs at the start of this month, I think, and essentially said, fine, we're good with no deal. We're happy to leave the G20 and go back home, and you can put your new tariffs on, and that'll be fine with us. And Trump said, wait, I didn't really mean it. I'm sorry, Mr. Xi. I really wanted to negotiate with you. I'm not trying to be difficult. And so Xi essentially said, fine, if you want a deal, here are our terms for starting the negotiations. So he was smart as Xi. Xi understood that he has leverage over Trump because Trump needs a deal, because Trump knows that the stock market has priced in trade talk optimism for this entire year, and that this whole rally is predicated on the eventual promise that Trump will get a trade deal. And this G20 summit has been seen as a major a checkpoint along the way to a full trade deal. And so if Trump had no negotiations and no trade talk optimism coming out of this G20 deal, you could very well see a very significant market sell-off. And so essentially, Xi was able to get concessions out of Trump before ever sitting down at the negotiation table. Xi didn't have to give anything up other than his time in order to get this out of Trump. And what Xi got was he got Trump to undo all the Huawei restrictions. Restrictions which were not so much about trade as they were about supposedly national security, because they were all upset and saying, oh my gosh, we can't let Huawei put 5G across the world, because, well, one, it would be very inexpensive because Huawei is a much cheaper company than, say AT&T or Verizon as far as their infrastructure goes. But the national security concern that these people always talk about, and again, I'm not sure how important of a concern it is, but they're worried that the Chinese are spying on people through Huawei phones. And I kind of say, well, who cares? The U.S. government's already spying on me. I mean, the Chinese can do less to me than the U.S. can, because I don't live in China. But supposedly this was separate from the trade deal, the Huawei stuff, and it was more of a national security thing. And Trump said, oh, fine, I don't care about Huawei since it's not that big of a deal from a trade perspective. Trump doesn't really care about, American cell phone manufacturers because they're all made in China anyway. So Trump happily gave up this Huawei restriction thing, and of course I'm sure the national security state is quite miffed about it. And so now he's got Mr. Xi to come back to the table and continue talks. Now from here, I'm still not too optimistic that they're going to be able to come to the kind of deal that Mr. Trump would like. I don't think you're going to be seeing the Chinese, now that they know that they smell blood in the water, that Trump is desperate. They're not going to, come to a mutually amicable settlement here. They're not going to have something where both sides get what they want and there's equal trade-offs. The terms will obviously be shifted in the Chinese's favor, since Trump is the one that wants the deal so bad. And so my guess here is that if there is any actual deal that comes out of this G20 meeting, it won't be exactly what Trump advertised. It'll be something kind of like the USMCA was to NAFTA. When Trump pulled out of NAFTA, he said, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA and we're going to have a better deal. And then we got the USMCA, which is basically NAFTA with Trump's name stamped on it. It's not that different, which is why nobody really talks about the USMCA. Nobody's worried about it because it's basically NAFTA. That's probably what we're going to end up with out of this G20 settlement is we'll see some kind of agreement to, if there's an agreement, it will be to return to the status quo. That's the best case scenario now. It's just to return to the status quo ante prior to the whole trade war nonsense. We're just going to sweep this under the rug, and Trump's going to come home and do a victory lap and say, see, I won. I got us back to the starting line. Which, again, to me, I would consider that a victory because I think the trade war was a mistake. Sure, is it great that the Chinese put on tariffs? No, it's terrible for the Chinese people and it's bad for U.S. companies. We understand that. Tariffs are not a good thing. But trade wars are a worse thing. Because then you're punishing, American consumers for the actions of the Chinese government. Doesn't make any sense. So if Trump gets us back to the status quo, I'll be very happy with him. He will have undone this bad idea, and the equity markets will no doubt be euphoric at the realization that there's going to be no more trade war and that we have a quote-unquote, trade deal. Now, that's going to be a problem, though, for President Trump, because I actually have been thinking that Trump would be a little tougher in these negotiations and be willing to walk away from the G20 with no deal. And maybe he still does feel that way, but he wanted to at least try and get to the negotiating table, because I'm sure if, let's say that this this G20 deal doesn't happen and they leave the negotiations with no deal, Trump will probably just slap the Huawei restrictions right back on there. So this promise of lifting the Huawei restrictions was just to get to the negotiating table. So they only really have to lift the things until they get a deal. So if there is no deal, Trump just puts them back on. So he hasn't really given up anything yet in the long term, which means if he's not able to get the kind of deal out of the Chinese which he wants, which I don't think he will, he'll either have to take what Trump may consider to be a bad deal, or he's going to take no deal. And if he does take no deal, well, then certainly the Fed will have to cut rates, because this is going to be terrible for the equity markets, and the Fed understands that stocks are really all that matters in this economy. They are data dependent on the S&P 500. When stocks go up, the Fed is hawkish. When stocks go down, the Fed is dovish. This is a very clear pattern. Everybody knows it. And so Trump, I think, understands that there is a plus side to walking away with no deal, and that's that if there's no deal after this G20 summit, I think you pretty much have a guarantee of a 50 basis point rate cut from the Fed, which I don't think will help things, but Trump thinks will help things. Trump, I think, here sees that he's in a win-win scenario. If he sits down, if he gives up this stupid Huawei concession that Trump doesn't care about anyway, he has a chance of getting a trade deal that he wants with the Chinese. However, if he doesn't get the deal that he wants, he at least gets a 50 basis point rate cut. So just because Trump gave up on this Huawei thing doesn't necessarily mean that he's willing to take any deal. The Chinese, however, might, by the fact that Trump gave up this Huawei concession, they may see it as blood in the water. That's why I think they'll probably be quite aggressive here. So your chances of a no-deal thing between the combination of Trump having the fallback of the 50 basis point rate cut and the Chinese being emboldened by Trump's early concessions, I think actually raises the likelihood of no deal here more so than going into the weekend. So while there is a chance that Trump completely caves and comes away with a USMCA-style pseudo deal that really doesn't change anything, but is sort of a moral victory for him, I do think that is still less than a 50% chance. I'm not sure what the ratio is, maybe 60-40, but I'm still leaning towards no deal coming out of this weekend. So we'll see. And Monday will certainly be a very interesting day for stocks, either to the upside or to the downside, and we'll have to see what the Fed does. I think that if Trump comes away, I think that Trump would be, from his perspective, probably would be mistaken in coming away with a USMCA-style, pseudo deal, because he would lose his Fed rate cut, because the Fed would not have an excuse to cut rates if there's a trade deal, because that's optimistic for stocks. But also, Trump wouldn't get anything of what he wants. So really, he'd lose everything, because China would still have their high tariffs. He would still have that trade relationship that he's not happy about, and he wouldn't get his rate cuts. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.